Joining us now on the Boardwalk Kinda Hotline, he is Tom Moore, sports columnist for the Bucks Courier Times. We'll get into some Eagles, get into some Sixers as well. Busy day in Philadelphia sports here in the region. Tom, how you doing on this Monday?
Oh, I'm fine, Josh. It's been a busy time. I think I've had 7 columns in the last 8 papers, so a lot to write about with mainly the Sixers and some Phillies news and the Eagles. So yeah, there's a lot going on for an October where usually we don't have as much happening right now. It's pretty much all Eagles, and that's it.
Let's start with the Eagles because I want to ask you the question I put out there a little bit earlier in the show, which was, for me, I watched the game yesterday, and I feel like, look, I'm not saying that Wentz and Peterson are amazing right now, but I felt that they both did better on Sunday night than they've done in previous weeks. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I agree. I would agree. I thought the game plan was better. It was more mixed with the running and the passing, even though the running really didn't work that well, in the first half. But I think at least there was a commitment to stick to it. It wasn't drop back every time. And, there were stretches where you had 4 guys starting on the line who weren't regular starters. It was just Jason Kelsey and 4 guys who should be backups or who were backups. And Wentz, he looked to run the ball a little bit, which he's gotten away from before. He used to run too much, and then McNabb did the same thing where they kind of get in that mode where, they don't want to, they try to avoid it, and they become strictly drop-back passers. But he looked to run a little bit, which they needed, with all those new wide receivers. And, he had a decent game, certainly his best, better than the 2 previous weeks, with just an absolute makeshift group of receivers. So, yeah, I thought, the 49ers were a little banged up, and I was really surprised how well, the backup quarterback came in, just moved him right down the field and, had a little bit more time. It could have been trouble there. But, yeah, it was a solid performance and by Wentz and Peterson, and I don't think you could say that the last 2 weeks. You could call their performances a bunch of adjectives, but solid was not one of them.
You mentioned Donovan McNabb, and I think back to all the injuries that McNabb dealt with as well, and yet he still finished his career with 5 NFC Championship appearances, and he won the most games of the quarterback in franchise history. So, if at worst the best Wentz ever is Donovan McNabb, I feel like the Philadelphia franchise could do a lot worse.
Yeah, I mean, well, you look at the the Bengals and look at so many of these other franchises. I mean, they thought Andy Dalton was the guy, and they gave him whatever it was 4 or 5 years, and it clearly didn't work out. And now they have a good young quarterback in Joe Burrow. But stability at quarterback, a franchise quarterback, is so essential because if you don't have it, you have to try to manufacture it, acquire guys late in their careers. Rent a guy for a year or 2. Fitzmagic is a perfect example of that. He's been anywhere and everywhere, and he's an ideal guy if you need a stopgap for a year. But you really need somebody you can sort of build around, who can have a 10-plus year career and, can really just solidify that position and give you one less question mark, at an absolutely essential position.
I know the Eagles were dealing with guys from the practice squad like Travis Fulgham and Adrian Killens last night, but how much of a concern is it for the team moving forward of the issues when it comes to getting talent consistently, not just in the draft, but in terms of just building the roster with guys who we know are going to be on the field each week?
Yeah, I think they're having a little bit of the same problem that Andy Reid had late in his tenure here, where they had let some veterans leave or veterans retired, so on, and it was that next man up mentality. But you went from Brian Dawkins to Quentin Michael, and when you do too many of those things, you lose personality. I mean, they don't seem to have a lot of playmakers on defense. They did make some plays last night, which is one of the reasons why they won. But they really don't seem to have a lot of playmakers and a lot of personalities. And I think the same thing happened, with Andy Reid late, and with especially at the linebacker position. Now, Singleton made a huge play, and I would expect him. Nate Gary just seems to get beat like a drum, and he goes after those ball fakes, play action all the time. I would think that maybe Singleton earned a right to get some more reps there, based on, what he did. They let guys like Nigel Bradham, and I understand later in the career they want more money and so on. But, he was a playmaker. He was a guy you could plug in there and he would make 10 tackles a game for you, or 9 tackles a game, whatever it was. So if you have too many situations like that and too much erosion, I think that you see some of the things that happened, with the Eagles now, and it happened, late in Andy Reid's tenure here.
Tom Moore joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, on Twitter at Tom Moore Philly. Tom, you mentioned the defense, and I got to ask you, this defense, 18 hits on the quarterback last week, 15 last night. It seems like that defensive front is finally kind of woken up a little bit, because it felt like for the first couple of weeks you were kind of wondering, is anybody really out there aside from maybe a little bit of Brandon Graham and a little bit of Malik Jackson?
Yeah. I think some of those guys, the defensive end position especially has been much better than it was. I think those guys were underperforming a bit, early on, and that should be one of the strengths of the team. I really think so, and it almost has to be, as I said, with the question marks at linebacker and the secondary. You got to get a lot of pressure on the quarterback, to increase the chances that you're going to win. So I thought last night, and really, I guess the week before, I believe they had 8 sacks. So the last 2 weeks, they've been much more active and aggressive, and making plays, which is what the defense desperately needs them to do.
Tom, let's flip it over to the Sixers, because Doc Rivers had his press conference today, and I thought your question to him was an incredible question, because it allowed people to really get a unique level of insight into the person of Doc Rivers. So if you could just kind of give the audience a little kind of repeat of what the question was and Doc's answer, because I felt that learning more about Doc Rivers, the person behind the coach, is really going to even more endear him to the Philadelphia, the city, and the fan base.
Yeah, I just said, first of all, that the first time I asked him a question was 30 years earlier, when I was doing a story on Mo Cheeks, and back when I used to travel, and he played for the Hawks, and I asked him about Mo, and he said that he was his all-time favorite player. And then I said, beyond winning a championship, what's something you've accomplished in your coaching career, that you really, something that you're really, stands out in your mind. And he talked about some different things. Hello?
Yeah, you're still with us.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I just switched. I was walking around and I got in my car, so I was waiting for the dash to pick up. Yes, he talked about his first year in Orlando when they were projected to be one of the worst teams in the league and ended up going 500 back in the Grant Hill, Tracy McGrady days, and last year with the Clippers. This year with great expectations, lost in the second round of the playoffs. But just, some of the adversity and the pressure, and he talked about the whole sports science thing with the load management. He's an incredible. I wrote something last week. I've covered the league for 32 years, and he's the best coach in terms of answers with the media and just getting it, understanding what's going on, giving you what you need, and then some. In that respect. And Brett Brown was very good, don't get me wrong, but Doc is at another level in terms of just his answers, and he always seems to have a perennially raspy voice. He's always on the verge of losing his voice or has lost his voice or whatever, but just a really interesting guy, very charismatic. I think the fans will really like him, and I think, most importantly, he's going to hold Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid accountable. He's going to encourage Ben to shoot those mid-range shots. I don't care about three-pointers, but open mid-range shots are really important. And Joel to lose a little bit of weight, get in excellent shape, and have a career year here, something that he's shown flashes of, but, has always had something nagging or whatever going into the playoffs.
You mentioned Ben and Joel, and I thought that was an interesting point that, Doc brought up a couple times that he said, listen, I came here because of the players who are here. He mentioned that, when Ben and Joel on the floor, they win 65% of the time. And it reminded me of what Elton had said previously. He said, listen, we want to keep Ben and Joel here. We're not looking to trade these guys. And it seems like that Elton found a coach who has the same desire to work with these guys and see what they can do.
Yeah, Doc Rivers understands the importance of talent. If you don't have talent, you have to try to somehow manufacture a way to win or be successful. So you've got, one of the 2 or 3 best centers in the league, should be the best center in the league, but you can make cases for 2 other guys, I would say. And you have Simmons, and he was asked, is he a point guard? Is he a point forward? Is he a power forward? He said, he's really into positionless basketball. He's into, you put 5 guys out there and you kind of figure it out. You find guys that can score. You spread the ball. You find the open guy. That kind of thing. And you take your shot with those guys. He raved about Shake Milton, who had a monster game out in L.A. against the Clippers when the Sixers were shorthanded. He coached Tobias Harris, who had his best season before he was traded here a year and a half ago. So almost 2 years ago now. So yeah, he's got some familiarity with the players here, and now he needs to maximize, their abilities and take them on a run beyond the second round of the playoffs.
Tom Moore, Bucks County Courier Times. Follow him on Twitter at Tom Moore Philly. Of course, he's been covering the Sixers for many years now. Check out all of his work over at the Bucks County Courier Times, on Twitter at Tom Moore Philly. Talking Eagles, Sixers, and more. And as all guests, he appeared today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Tom, always appreciate the time and take care.
Sure, you too. Anytime, Josh.